Okay, right. It's gotten 7 o'clock, so I think we can probably get started. So first of all, welcome to everybody for the first audit committee of the new municipal year. And I'd say a particular thank you at this point to the members and officers who've come in person for this audit committee, because obviously we need some in-person presence for the meeting to go ahead at all. So thank you for everybody for taking that step to come here as well. So item number 1, apologies. Do we have any apologies for absence? No, everyone's here. Very good. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. Does anybody have anything to raise on the minutes of the previous meeting? No, doesn't look like it. So everybody happy to confirm that? Just a very quick show of hands. Yeah, that's fine. Declarations of interest. Anybody needs to declare an interest today?
May I ask a question, Daniel?
Yep, go ahead.
Has your resignation as the directors of the subsidiary companies already been confirmed?
That is a good question. I know it's a process underway, so perhaps at this point I should probably be on the safe side and declare an interest in item personal interest, item number 6 for the audit plan, because there's a chance I know that it's underway for my resignation to be processed, but it may not have gone through Companies House yet, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I'll declare a personal interest as a non-executive director of the Wakeam Housing Limited, Berrybrook Homes Limited.
Okay.
Shahid? Okay, so it sounds like maybe either I am or you are, depending on what stage the paperwork's gone through. Imogen?
Yeah, I probably should declare that I've got about 3 years in the Berkshire Pension Fund.
Okay, thank you.
Just thinking about directors of subsidiary companies being on the audit committee at all. I know you were on last year and you declared it, but I've been thinking about it since we had the annual meeting, and I don't personally think it's appropriate for the director of a subsidiary company which is being audited to have its directors sitting on the internal audit committee, in effect. I think it may not be prejudicial, but it does limit what those people can be involved in, and it does create a conflict of interest for them, in my view. And I'm just expressing my concerns that actually that's how we set up this committee.
Okay, yeah, I think that's noted. I know Andrew Moulton provided advice at the full council that, in his view, it wasn't a requirement for me to not remain a non-executive director of those companies. So I think it's
actually what he said was it wasn't a prejudicial interest. He didn't say it wasn't a personal interest, because Imogen asked if it was a prejudicial interest, and you are now declaring a personal interest, and so is Shahid. Both of you may not have any this evening, but I would just like to express my concerns that directors of subsidiary companies actually sit on what's supposed to be a non-executive committee and the audit committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that's noted. I think we'd taken advice on this previously. So unless Andrew has anything in particular you'd like to add in addition to what we've heard already, I think we can probably move on. No, okay. So that's the declarations of interest. Public question time. I don't think we've got any public questions. No, we don't. So member question time. I think we've got Councillor Bray on the line. So you can go ahead and ask your question.
Before I ask it, can I say that I couldn't hear Shahid at all? I could hear everybody else in the chamber, but he did not register his voice. So I don't know whether you want to look at that while I'm talking. So I'd like to ask my question. During the recent local elections, the Conservatives issued leaflets that said Ernst & Young's independent audit states WBC's debt is 83 million. Where can I find Ernst & Young's report which shows this?
Okay, thank you for your question. Ernst & Young confirmed that the assurance they provide the council in their statutory role of external auditors does not include the quoted statement. However, it is not within the remit of this committee to comment on election literature produced by any political party. You have a supplementary.
I do, and thank you for that response, which confirms that that claim is untrue. So in my view, this episode shows a woeful lack of understanding of audit on the part of a number of Conservative councillors, some of whom are in senior roles, and at least one of whom I believe calls himself an accountant. So to prevent this kind of thing happening again, can a briefing note be sent to all councillors on the role of the external auditors and of the audit committee, including in it that the external auditors should not be dragged into party political campaigns, particularly when the claim being made about them is untrue?
Yeah, I think that's probably a reasonable request. It's always good that that councillors have an understanding of the role of the audit committee and the external auditors and how they interact with the risk management of the council. So I think that'll be fine, and we can arrange for that to take place.
Thank you.
So that, I believe, is the only member question today. So we can move on now to item number 6, which is the Woking Borough Council outline audit plan for the year ended 31st of March, which I believe EY are opening on. So Helen, I think you're on the line.
I am, thank you, Chairman. And I also have Stefan with me as the manager for the audit. So we will assume that you have read the paper in front of you, and so we'll just briefly introduce the reason for presenting this today. We obviously have not yet completed the 2019-20 audit, but we thought it was important that members had sight of the risks that we consider will be relevant to our 2020-21 audit. So I will ask Stefan briefly to cover the risks that we have identified on the financial statements, which are set out on pages 14 through to 17 of the papers. And then I will briefly talk about the changes to the value for money, I shouldn't say conclusion, the value for money assessment, which have changed for 2021 onwards. So Stefan, if I could ask you maybe just to touch on the changes to the financial statements risks, please.
Thank you, Helen. Good evening, members. As mentioned, the risks on page 14 through to 17 remain largely unchanged from the previous year. And I will briefly take you through these. Misstatement due to fraud and error and the risk of fraud in revenue and expenditure recognition. These two risks are inherently fraud risks, and we will audit them as significant risks. Then the valuation of land and buildings still remains a significant risk to us. And as such, we will be focusing on the properties that are largely influenced by market conditions. So these would be your properties that are carried at estimated useful value and your investment properties that are under fair value. Other properties that are carried at depreciated replacement costs and the housing revenue account properties that are influenced to a lesser degree by the market conditions, these will be audited as an inherent risk and a audit focus area for us. On page 15, the pension liability valuation still remains an area of focus to us. And this has changed from a significant risk in the prior year to an area of focus in the current year. The going concern disclosure also remains an inherent area of focus for us due to the ongoing market conditions due to COVID. Then we have the accounting for the COVID-19 grant, which is a new area of focus that we will be considering during the audit due to the significant level of government funding in relation to COVID-19 that has been received throughout the last 12 months. And then finally, we have the accounting for public finance initiative and a group accounting areas that we consider to be inherent risks. And this is due to the technical complexity that are that is involved in accounting for these two areas of the financial statements.
Thank you, Stefan. So just turning to the value for money assessment, we are operating under a new code of audit practice, which is laid before Parliament by the NAO and which governs the work that we do. And the most significant change to the 2020 code of audit practice has been to the value for money assessment. So there is no longer a single criterion. Instead, there are three specified reporting criteria. And what we are required to undertake now is a more detailed initial risk assessment against each of those reporting criteria. And each criterion is broken down into a set of specific arrangements, and these have been published, and this is what we will report against when we conclude the audit. From doing that initial risk assessment, the options are that either we identify a significant weakness in the proper arrangements, or we conclude that the proper arrangements are in place for all of those, for each of the criteria and all of the sub-arrangements. If we do identify a significant weakness, then we have to do more work, or if the weakness is very obvious. So, for example, a good example might be where there has been an inspection report that has concluded that which is a finding that concluded that arrangements are inadequate. We might say there is enough evidence to report as soon as we are able to do so. So we might either be doing more work, or we might actually sort of move to a conclusion very quickly. And we have to report our risk assessment to the committee. So obviously at this stage, we haven't gone through this level of detail, and therefore you don't have our assessment in this report. And that is something we will bring back. We are hoping to do that for the next committee meeting. Ultimately, if we are not satisfied that the council has proper arrangements in place, then we refer to this by exception in the audit report. So there's a slight difference, or there will be a slight difference in the audit report that you receive in future, because we won't be, if there are proper arrangements in place, effectively we say nothing. But what we do say is if we think there is a problem. The final key change that will happen from 2021 onwards, or the 2021 audit, I should say, onwards, is that we will no longer produce an annual audit letter. Instead, there will be an annual auditor report, and that will contain the reporting around the value for money. So against each of those three specified reporting criteria, we will then be saying what we consider to be the key arrangements in place that meet those. So it is going to look a little bit different. For the guidance from the NAO has come out somewhat late in the year, and obviously as an audit firm and all audit firms, we are still coping with seeing out previous audits, doing NHS audits. So there's an element of we're learning as we go along, but hopefully by the time we come to reporting it, we'll be able to give you a clear assessment of what you will be likely to receive, and then be able to set that out for you so that you will understand the differences. Chairman, I think that's all we really wanted to say in terms of a bit of a briefing and to try and summarise the level of detail in the report, but I hope that's helpful, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions? Okay, Councillor G.
Thank you, Helen. So in terms of the risks on page 14 to 17, I'd like to know, with the group accounting, has that been sorted now so that there's less work to do on the misalignment in accounting policies that we had before?
So yes, Councillor G, in respect of that, we would expect that having carried out a significant level of work to align the accounting policies this year, that will pay back in dividends for, well, I shouldn't say that really, should I, when I'm talking about companies, but it should pay us back as we move into the 2021 audit, because it should then be rolling forward based on a position that we've agreed on for the 2019-20 year. Apologies, I'm having to be very careful about when I say this year, next year, because for me it's a slightly different context.
I've got a few more questions, if I may, unless anybody else has got their hand
Yeah,
up.
maybe do one more and then we'll move on to Councillor Shepherd-Debay.
Okay. I'd like to ask about the assets at depreciated replacement cost. I seem to remember from last year, i.e. 2019-20, that there was some initial concern about the valuation of playing fields. So I just want to know what your opinion is of the likelihood of differences of opinion, even for assets where there's depreciated replacement costs, like we had the discussion last year about the playing fields. Thank you.
So in terms of depreciated replacement cost, I mean, obviously what we're not saying is that there aren't risks associated with that. It's just that the risk associated with DRC assets is slightly different from those valued at market value. I think we'll probably touch on it in a later agenda item when we talk about accounting policies, but there are changes being put in place by the council, by council officers, to look at different ways in carrying out the valuations, and therefore I would expect that we would cover that off. Equally, I'm continue to have conversations sort of as we see out the 2019-20 audit and as we move into 2020-21 about how we overcome and sort of address those issues at the start of the audit rather than them sort of emerging partway through.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Shepherd-Bay.
Hello. Yes, it might come later on, but I'm going to ask it now. The old Marks and Spencer's building is part of the Wokingham Town Centre regeneration project. Does that come under property, plant and equipment, or does that come under commercial property?
I would prefer to pass that across to officers, if I may, just in case I get it wrong.
I think Bob's on the call. Bob, can you tell me where that building gets audited?
Not directly tonight, as I don't have that to hand. I can find out. I can provide a written response. I believe most of the town centre regeneration works around Peach Place are still classed as assets under construction, so that's where they'll be reported as at this point.
My concern is that the Marks and Spencer's building was several million, and it was bought by the project, and rather than being built by the project, but I know it belongs to the project, in which case it doesn't come under property, plant and equipment, and it doesn't come under any other category that I know of. And it would be missing from the audit, or not be audited in terms of its value. I'll go away now.
Okay, so we'll go to Councillor Ross next, and then we'll go back to Councillor G.
Thank you, Chairman. With the changes in looking at the value of capital assets, will there be any changes where there is construction underway at the end of the major buildings, or will that just be the same as before?
So just picking up that point, we would continue. Assets that are under construction are an area that we will look at as part of the audit, as we always have done. So there will be no change to that. If I might go back to the earlier point, I'd just like to reassure members that there won't be any assets that fall outside of the remit of the audit. So I'm aware that we were looking at the Marks and Spencer or property as part of last year's audit, and I'm sure it will be as part of the sample that we might select this year as well. Sorry, for 2021.
Okay, Councillor G.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask a general question about this value for money audit, which looks like a lot more work. And I have to say, when I looked at the fees, which you haven't come on to yet, so you might be going to answer the question then. I don't understand how that additional work is reflected in the fee table, which is on page 28. So will you be coming on to that, or could you answer that now?
I can answer that now, Councillor G. In terms of the value for money work, does it create more work? The answer to that at the moment is it is difficult to tell, because there is more work up front in terms of carrying out the initial risk assessment, but in carrying out the initial risk assessment more thoroughly at the start, it may mean that we are not doing as much work in terms of identified areas of risk. So in terms of how does that impact the fee that is included on page, and I've forgotten the number that you said, and I'm not on the right one yet as I scroll down. Sorry, bear with me. On page, thank you. On page 28, that hasn't been included in the table for that reason, because we don't know really what impact that will have. Just to explain the way in which we have presented the fees at the moment, Members will know that the audit fee is set by public sector audit appointments. It was set at a point in time, and if anyone really wants to have the history of how fees come to be what they are, I am happy to provide that. But as you will have seen from the Redmond review that carried out a review into the external audit market in the public sector, there was a conclusion that and an acceptance by MHCLG that audit fees are now no longer represent risk or the risks associated with audits, and therefore all audit firms, including ourselves, have been looking at what the level of base fee ought to be for a council of the size of Wokingham and with the risks that we identify in Wokingham's audit. So what you will see in the table is the fee that is set by public sector audit appointments is 81,325, which is the top number. Then you will see a scale fee rebasing number underneath that, which is the 58,655, and you'll see that both in 2020-21 and 2019-20. That's the fee that the additional fee that we think is appropriate for an organisation of the size and complexity as Wokingham Borough Council. And we've carried out a similar exercise for every council. It's not based on a percentage. It is based on what are the risks and what is the work that we carry out at each audit. So there's no one size fits all approach. The way in which the fees are operated within the public sector is that any change to the scale fee, anything over and above the 81,000, etc., has to be agreed both by the council and by public sector audit appointments. There are times when fees are not agreed by the councils, and that is understandable. Obviously, they have a duty to protect the public purse as well. We have a responsibility to ensure that we are remunerated fairly for the level of work that we do. So in those instances, we might agree to disagree, and then the fee is put forward to public sector audit appointments to make a decision. For Wokingham, for the way in which we have created the fee table, is that there's two elements to any change in fee. One is what should the base fee be? And then what additional work have we had to carry out to be able to complete the audit? And you'll also see within the table a number of TBCs. That's because we haven't yet completed the 2019-20 audit. We want to focus on completing the audit and not get into a discussion about whether or not the fee is the right fee or the wrong fee. And therefore, we will complete the audit and then have discussions with Bob, and I'm sure Graham and others, about what level of fee should then be taken into account. So apologies, that's a bit of a long-winded way of answering your question, Councillor G, but it is quite a complex area, and we've included the scale fee rebasing number because we have had discussions with officers about that. Officers recognise, and I think accept, but I'm sure Bob will comment, that there have been changes to the work that we are required to do. There have been changes to the risks associated with the council, and so we touched on earlier issues around property, plant and equipment valuations, investment property valuations, group accounting disclosures, and they aren't necessarily reflected in the fee. However, the council's position, and I understand this, is it is not for them to determine what the appropriate fee should be. That is why they have entered into the PSAA contract, and therefore it's for PSAA to determine. How long that will take, I don't know. It can be quite a long process to agree fees with PSAA once it goes into their process. So apologies, Chairman, I've probably taken up a lot more time than you were expecting in answering that question, but I hope that's helpful, and I'm happy to try and clarify if that would be needed.
Okay, thank you. Members, are there any further questions on this item? I see no one indicating, and I don't think there's anything to vote on this update, so I think we can thank EY and move on to item number 7, which is the update on changes to accounting policies, which, Bob, I think you're leading on.
Yes, good evening again, everybody. Just like to say this is a change to our accounting policies that we is best practice to bring this forward to Audit Committee before we start closing the accounts in earnest. So we then have the direction of where we're going to go. For those of you that read the accounts right through to the last page, will note that at the end of the accounts, we list out all our accounting policies, and that's that note is contained in Appendix A to this part of the report. There is only two significant changes that we're introducing at this stage this year. The reason why it's significant changes, or what's insignificant, is a lot of the other policies will have things like dates changed to make sure that they are with the current accounting standards and the current processes. And the two changes that we are proposing this time was already mentioned by Helen earlier. The first one is around our revaluations policy, and we're moving based on advice from EY, based on best practice in other local authorities, to what we class as a basket of goods to be revalued. Normally, or previously, we revalued goods by, assets by their type. So we revalue all the schools, and then the next year we revalue all the playing fields and so on like that, and the operational land and buildings. What we're moving to now is a basket of all those types of assets. So at any point in time, when they've been revalued, we have that benchmark we can use to assess the other types of the other types of assets within that asset class. So it gives both us as the council officers and the auditors a benchmark they can use when assessing what the value of the non-revalued assets is likely to be and any changes. So that we think is a step forward and certainly progressive, and I think has the support of the external auditors. The second change we're proposing is that we are going to change the date of when we value our assets at. And for this year, i.e. the 2021 closing of the accounts, we haven't yet done the valuations, so it makes obvious logical sense to revalue as at the balance sheet date, which is the 31st of March 2021. Going forward, we're hoping to be on the front foot with our valuations, and we will start the valuations earlier, but we will try and value, or we aim to value, as at the 1st of January of the year of which the accounts relate to. The reason for doing this means that when we do the final accounts and we close down on the 31st of March of that year, we have a very good proxy of what the valuations would be as at the 31st of March, and we don't have to do too much adjustments, if any at all. Whereas we currently value on the 1st of April, we had to put a whole year's worth of adjustments in, if, as in the case of this year with the COVID, and certainly in the 2021 accounts, we will certainly see an impact of the COVID on the valuations, which is why we're doing the valuations at balance sheet date and going forward proposing to do them on the 1st of January of the year the accounts relate to. And that is all the changes we're proposing at this stage. It has been discussed with the external auditors, who seem to be in favour of it. I can't speak for them, but I'm sure Helen will confirm it's better for them, it's better for us, and therefore I'm asking the committee to approve the changes to our accounting policies.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob. It's good to see the basket of goods valuation change come in, because I know we discussed that as an audit committee in the last municipal year. So it's nice to see that flow through in this paper. But members, do you have any questions for Bob on this item? Councillor Jean.
Overall, I agree with the changes due to the basket of goods. However, one of the issues would be that if you were auditing all assets of a particular category type, so valuing assets of a particular category type, it wouldn't necessarily have any overflow into any other asset category, any asset categories. However, with this, what would happen if you valued, say, one school or a library, and you found that conditions had changed for that library or school, which meant that the valuation of the other assets was then brought into doubt? I'm not too up on whether you would have to then go and look at the other assets and also value them, or whether the valuations can stay for each particular asset until it's revalued again. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, and I understand the question, I hope. I would say that the idea of doing these basket of goods is if we saw one class of assets or an asset in one class of assets change significantly, it would give us the indication that A, we'd either need to go and revalue all the other assets in that same class, or use the asset that we revalued as a proxy for a desktop revaluation of all the other assets in the class. And say this is part with the discussions we would then have with EY as our external auditors, and to help them get a position where they can say, yes, we're happy with the valuations you've used. So we would have the decision ourselves as council officers, and would probably try and preempt any external audit request. But again, we would also work very closely with EY and say, are you happy that this is a representative proxy for all the other assets in that asset class, and the desktop valuation that we've then done falling out of that valuation process.
Thank you. Makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Members, anybody else got any questions? Councillor Yunus.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, this question, Bob, on the baskets of goods evaluation. In terms of the classification, who decides? Is it the officers who decide, or is it actually a mutual discussion with the external auditors?
The designation of the basket of goods comes under the SIPFA code, which tells you what type of assets to put them in. The original accounting policy, as with all accounting policies, are a council decision. We set our accounting policies, but again, it is done in collaboration with the external auditors, because there's no point in setting a policy that would then lead us to more and more audit work and more audit questions. So the policies are designed to help the auditors. And again, the majority of the accounting policies are based on either the SIPFA code or best practice recommended by SIPFA, who are the accounting body that dictates what we do. So the asset classes are quite laid out in the service, the SIRCOP they call it, the service code of practice on how we report in our accounts, and the BVA got best value accounting code of practice that SIPFA issue. We will follow those categories, but the actual selection of which items in the basket would be done potentially in consultation with ourselves and EY, to make sure that EY are happy that we have a representative sample when we put them forward.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I can see no other members indicating. So we've got a vote on this item. So the recommendation that the revised statement of accounting policies per Appendix A are approved for adoption, inclusion in the statements of accounts for the year ended 31st March 2021. Those in favour of that? Okay, thank you. That's everybody. So I don't think we need to labour that anymore. And we can move on to item number 8, which is the annual governance statement 2020-2021. And Andrew, I think you're the one leading on this item.
That's correct, Chairman, and good evening, members. So this is the draft annual governance statement for 2020-21, which is on pages 55 to 69 of your pack. If I can just sort of introduce it. There are 3 recommendations that you're being asked to consider this evening. So firstly, it's the actual draft annual governance statement itself, to consider that. Then recommending it for sign off by the leader of the council and the chief executive. This document, it's a key governance document for the council, and it sits alongside the council's statement of accounts. And then thirdly, to consider in year what updates you might require in terms of progress against the action plan that sits with the AGS. So in terms of process that we've been through as officers before it comes to you this evening, it's been a comprehensive process of seeking assurance right across the officer group in all the directorates, culminating in a discussion at the corporate leadership team meeting, having each director received assurances from their assistant directors as to the control issues in their particular areas. it also, just to remind the committee in terms of your precise role with regard to this, and I will quote from the Constitution, this is under the Audit Committee's remit, and it's paragraph 4.4.3.2.g, the regulatory framework. So the Audit Committee's role is to oversee the production of the authority's AGS and to recommend its adoption. And I'd suggest that as you're considering that, you're thinking about the information that you've got in front of you this evening, but you're also considering, for example, the council's risk management arrangements, which is the next item on tonight's agenda. You're thinking about the reports that you receive from internal audit, and you've got the internal audit annual plan later on this evening. So you're thinking about the whole environment of governance in the council. We've taken on board some comments from our external auditors in terms of the production of this year's AGS. So, for example, risk management does feature as the first improvement action on our action plan. And there are 8 actions this year that are on page 68 that have come out of Officers' Assessment of the Control Environment. They're at, as I say, page 68 and Appendix B. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions on those. Just before I do so, and just the final comment that I'd make is the action plan for the previous annual governance statement. There were 6 actions that are referred to in the report that you've got tonight. 5 of those have been completed. The one area that we've got more work to do, which is around human resources, that's been carried forward into the 2020-21 improvements action plan. But as I say, Chairman, very happy to take any comments with regard to the process that we've gone through, or indeed any of the improvement actions that you see in front of you this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Bit of feedback about that. I don't think it's my PC. But members, have you got any questions for Andrew? Councillor G.
Hello, thank you, Andrew. I was just thinking back to what we've done over the last year, and we did have a look at one point at the best practice for audit committees, and we said we were going to send out a questionnaire to all councillors, and just bearing in mind what Councillor Bray said this evening about training. I'm just wondering whether that should be on here. Do you remember we were going to have a look at things like whether you should have an independent member as the chair? And I note that we don't have any independent members this year, which is a bit disappointing, but I think it's something to do with the percentages of who's on which committee. So should that be on here, or should that be somewhere else? Do you know the document I'm referring to, Andrew?
I do, and Chairman, I think Councillor G makes a good suggestion there for this committee, that you could add a 9th improvement action, which is around the function of the audit committee. I know, Chairman, that you want to perhaps at the end of this meeting discuss sort of training needs, gap analysis with regard to the audit committee potentially. So we could include it in the action plan for the AGS, just to give it that focus.
Yeah, I think we're going to do best practice, weren't we? We're going to assess ourselves against best practice, or find out what all councillors needed, something like that. So I'm thinking a bit more than training, a bit more of the accounting of the audit committee assessing itself and councillors assessing the audit committee. I think that's what that document was heading to eventually.
Yeah, and as I say, I think that would be helpful for us to just give some focus. So whilst that assessment hasn't been done yet, I think, and so we're not saying that it's been identified as a weakness at this point in time, but certainly it's on the officer list to do that through this municipal year.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a very good suggestion. And saying that Andrew and I briefly spoke about before in the preparation for this meeting as well. So I think that's a good shout. Any other members got anything to raise on this? Councillor Shepherd-Debay.
turning it on. I'm sort of looking at the governance issues of particularly like the members' code of conduct, the capacity to do the members' code of conduct complaints in a timely manner. Is there any form of service level agreement for these or anything like that, or schedule? The other thing is it refers to well, I'm just wondering, you know, what agreements do we have in terms of processing code of conduct complaints? I'm also concerned with the public sector equality duty reference here, is that the plan was meant to be iterative. It's kind of looking like, yep, we've done that, but it wasn't meant to be yes, we've done that. It's meant to be an ongoing process. Hopefully I'm making sense.
Yeah, if I could take both of those points, Chairman. So firstly, with regard to member code of conduct complaints, it's important that I think it is on the AGS this year. There's a piece of work that I'll be doing through the Standards Committee to make sure that any complaints can be processed quickly. We've had a few issues with regard to capacity, so we're looking at our investigation capacity, making sure that we can process and deal with complaints in a more speedily way than what we have done certainly over the last 12 months, which is why it's on the AGS to give it that particular focus. That will be picked up at the next meeting of the Standards Committee, which is next month. With regard to the comment about equalities, you'll see that it was on the 2019-20 action plan, and as members will be aware, Council in March approved the updated equality plan. The reason that it's been taken forward into the 2020-21 improvement action plan is it's about now embedding and implementing a whole series of improvement actions that sit with that equalities plan. So I guess I'd coin that phrase, making it real. So it's going beyond the plan and actually implementing that plan. But again, because this is so important as a policy and strategy for the council, it felt appropriate when it was discussed at the corporate leadership team that it's referenced as part of the annual governance statement.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other members with any points they wish to make on this item? Nobody is indicating. So we've got 3 recommendations on page 55. I won't read all of them because they're in front of you already. Can we have members who are for those recommendations? Can they show now, please?
Could I just ask a quick question? Would those recommendations be with the addition of the item that I mentioned earlier and that you agreed would be a good idea? That's what we're agreeing to. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Yep. Okay, members for? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And Andrew, I'm afraid it looks like we're back to you to introduce the next item, which is the corporate risk register, item number 9.
Thank you, Chairman. I will introduce it, but just when I finish my preamble, I'll hand over to Steve Moore, who's on the call, who's our interim director of Place and Growth. And Steve is here as those members who've been on this committee for a little while have been used to having directors attend for the risk management item to give a particular sort of flavour of risk with regard to their own directorate. But if I can just give you the headlines from this. So this is on page 71 to 94. And the recommendation that you've got in front of you is to consider and note the risks and mitigating actions of the council's corporate risks as detailed in the detailed corporate risk register at Appendix A. What I would say in terms of sort of directing the committee's attention is that, and I think this point has been made previously, but this is about, the focus should be on the audit committee satisfying yourselves that our process of risk identification and risk mitigation is sound, as opposed to delving in too much depth into individual risks. I think it's probably fair to say that in terms of the risk management arrangements, we're on a journey. I think we made some improvements last year and they were acknowledged by EY, but we have further work to do. And between this committee and the next committee at the end of next month, the corporate leadership team will be undertaking a workshop to think about how we can further develop our risk management arrangements. So just in terms of what you've got in front of you tonight, which is effectively a sort of interim, somewhat of a holding sort of position, you've got no new risks since the committee last looked at this in February. But two of the risks that you saw in February have been removed. One was the elections risk, having successfully delivered the May 2021 elections, and also the end of EU transition, the data risk around that, since we had confirmation that that risk has been fully mitigated. I should say, with regards to reviewing scrutiny, we'll be looking at any lessons learned from elections this time at one of their committee meetings in the next few months. So ONS will continue to look at that particular issue. At the bottom of page 72 and onto page 73, I give you the headlines in terms of any changes to the individual assessments of specific risks, but hopefully those are self-explanatory. But if I could pause there, and Chairman, if you're happy, if I ask Steve to give his overview for his directorate at this stage.
Yes, makes sense. Let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to come and talk to the committee this evening. So I'm Steve Moore. I'm the interim director of Place and Growth, and I'm new into post. I've been here about 3 weeks. So obviously getting up to speed with a number of things, and as Andrew quite mentioned there, the importance of revisiting and reviewing and reflecting on our approach to risk and building on that conversation we've had from a corporate leadership team perspective is very important. To the report itself, there's one specific item, as Andrew reflected on, which is the change in status on the local plan, which has moved from a red risk to an amber risk or a medium risk, primarily due to the fact we now have confidence we have a good programme in place where we can get to what is commonly known as Regulation 18 stage by this autumn, and be well within the programme timetable to seek examination of our local plan prior to any introduction of planning reform to meet the government's target of pre-2024. So confidence certainly increased in that arena. And again, in relation to local plan, regular monitoring and conversations, of course, going on with housing developments as well, which is a continual ongoing process. So just to give you confidence, it's an extremely important, robust programme governed process within the organisation, of which I'm taking a leading role to ensure we are on track. Another couple of risks I think within Place and Growth worth bringing to your attention, or certainly items that require monitoring from a risk perspective. Of course, Wokingham Borough Council, ourselves, in line with other local authorities up and down the country, have issued a climate emergency, and work continues in relation to the action plan, which I must say is very comprehensive from what I've seen to date in relation to our approach for tackling this really important agenda. There's considerable number of actions on there, and I'm going to be looking at the review of that, the progress of that, and the implementation as we move forward from a readiness perspective. I know that's an extremely important agenda for all members. Two more for me specifically. Members, of course, will be aware that the council took the view to dissolve its relationship with the Public Protection Partnership earlier on in the year. And one of my functions here in my interim tenure will be to ensure that there is a smooth transition in relation to from the current partnership, as it's currently stated, into a standalone service that will serve the residents and the borough and keep them safe and meet their needs. And the final one I draw to members' attention is probably around waste disposal, waste treatment. Something we've noticed, of course, probably up and down the country over the last year or so is a changing behaviour in the way that, of course, a lot more people are working from home and producing a lot more domestic waste than what was come up before. So we do need to track our tonnages and what we're presenting through to our joint waste disposal arrangements through the RE3 arrangement to keep a track of the financial implications in that area. And of course, we also have an income stream that comes out of that particular contract, and making sure we keep a very close eye on commodities markets as they may change through the changing world we live in at the moment. So, as I say, 3 weeks in, that's a brief overview of some of the things that have certainly come to my attention and things that will certainly keep me busy and require me to focus and dive into in more detail. But I'm happy, Mr. Chairman, to take any questions that members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Andrew, as well for the overview before that. Members, have you got any questions for either Steve or Andrew at this point? Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wonder, with the continuing COVID impact, whether there's a risk identifiable to governance of the council as we try to return to live meetings. We know what happened with the full council. We didn't find a venue for it. I don't have any particular views, but I just wonder whether that's seen as a risk to governance.
Perhaps if I could take that, Chairman. I think Councillor Ross makes a good point. We had a lot of work to do in a very short timescale as the government announced that the virtual meeting environment that had been in place for the last 12 months had come to an end immediately after the elections. We do have contingency planning in place and a lot of work that's sort of happening behind the scenes at the moment to think about how the next council meeting in July will be run, and we're considering a number of options around that at the moment. What I would say, and hopefully I'm not going to jinx this evening, but I think in terms of the ability for democratic services and other officers to actually run a hybrid meeting like we're doing tonight, where we've got members in the chamber because we need to have them there to ensure the legality of your decision making, but officers and others, public as well, coming in through Teams. I think we do have a good technology solution in place, which isn't necessarily the case for a lot of local authorities that I've seen over the last month. But it's certainly perhaps not an issue for the corporate risk register, but it's certainly on the governance services risk register. Councillor Ross.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shepherd.
Hi there. I know that obviously we've chosen to leave the public protection partnership that's been set up, and we've got environmental health things. I don't see it on this risk register, and I'm just wondering if it should be the transition, because obviously there's a finite time for doing the work.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll pick up that response. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, you're quite right. It's not on the register, but it is important. And Andrew, I think, stated with his introduction that we need to review and reflect over the next few weeks to look at these risks to make sure that they are included in the risk register going forward. So it's certainly something, just to give you assurance, Councillor, that it's something we are tracking very closely. We have extremely robust programme governance in place, and I myself, so you're aware, from a corporate director perspective, meet very regularly with my corporate director counterparts in both West Berkshire and Bracknell Forest to ensure that we are, from a sponsorship point of view, leading the logistics of the operation to make sure both the partnership and what we're doing within Wokingham continues to operate safely. We've also recruited some expertise from a project management perspective in post that's reporting directly to the new interim AD of place, who again has significant public protection experience. So, Councillor and Mr. Chairman, we are well placed from a risk point of view, but you're quite right. I think it's something when we do reflect and revise the corporate risk register, which of course should always be a live document as things change, as we know, throughout the year. It is certainly something that I'll be recommending is presented onto the register. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor G.
Yeah, I know we're not supposed to be delving into this too much, but I do have some specific questions. I'm a bit baffled by 4, the local plan delays and appeals and 5-year housing land supply. One of the existing controls is the executive approved consultation on the draft local plan on the 15th of January 2020. Well, as we know, that's been thrown up in the air, and we're having 2 meetings, one last week and one this week, about where to site the houses. And I'm just baffled as to why this is in medium risk when we don't have a local plan update or an agreed local plan.
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to pick that point up for me? Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So what I can assure you is, and I'm again, please forgive me not knowing the histrionics of what's gone on. Obviously, it's been a few weeks, but I'm aware there was a previous regulating process of which there was quite a strategic site that didn't come to fruition, and that required a review of the process. Now, conversations have been continuing with officers looking at other sites availability, and that forms itself into something called a new timetable, which is a local development scheme document. It's called the LDS. That is on track to come forward to the executive in July of this year. So that's our timetable, and we would not be looking to go out to a regular 18 stage, a regulation 18 stage in the autumn, unless we were confident that we did have the necessary sites that could go out for consultation in relation to the numbers required. So certainly the conversations I'm involved today and the information we have will suggest we should be able to meet the supply that requires us to deliver in respect of our housing targets going forward.
Thank you. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that. There's going to be agreement about that, but never mind. I've got 2 questions about the climate emergency. One is just about wording. So on item 12, which is on page 90, further actions to mitigate risk. It says internal audit of climate emergency proposed to audit committee. I think that was the climate emergency action plan, wasn't it? We were going to do an audit of that. So I'm just wondering whether the wording of that is correct. And the second question is, if this is one of our key priorities, surely we should have, in order to mitigate the risk and make sure it keeps in everybody's mind, should have an executive member for climate emergency. And we had one last year. Now we don't have one anymore. And I'm not sure that's a way to keep this under control. I think having it as somebody's specific remit would be a better way of mitigating the risk that we don't meet the action plan. And that is one of the notes in existing controls. There's more work that needs to be done.
Chairman, if I could take that one. So the internal audit of climate emergencies is in internal audits plan for this year. In fact, in the first quarter. So we've been doing a lot of work in the background in terms of finding the right resources with the right expertise to deliver that. Our plan is to in part use our own team, but also use some expertise from outside to help deliver that internal audit. And with regard to your second point, Councillor G, I'll pick that up and make sure that that's identified in the next iteration of the risk register, and that the point you make about clarity of lead member responsibility.
Yeah, it's just the wording of the item about the internal audit. It says internal audit of climate emergency, but I think it should be internal audit of climate emergency action plan. Just clarity. That's I was just nitpicking there. And thank you for the response about having it clear which the lead member is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor G. I think that's a fair point on the on it being an internal of the action plan. So I think that's what the audit committee did agree last year. Any other councillors wish to ask a question at this point? No, nobody indicating. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to Steve. Thank you to Andrew. I'm just flicking back to see if there's anything we need to vote on this. We're asked to consider and note the risks and mitigating actions. So I think we don't need to take a show of hands on that. So then we move on from the corporate risk register onto item number 10, which is 2020-2021 annual internal audit and investigation report, which I think is Catherine. Hand over to you. Thank you.
And good evening, everybody. Agenda item 10 is on pages 95 to 114 of the agenda pack, and this presents the 2021 annual internal audit and investigation report. I think it's fair to say it's been an unprecedented year due to the impact of the COVID pandemic on our planned internal audit work and our working practices. The original 2021 audit and investigation plan was approved by Audit Committee in February 2020. But due to the impact of COVID, the committee agreed to an in-year review of the original plan. And this revised plan was agreed in September 2020. As part of this review, we agreed new audit priorities and we refocused and reprioritised the work of the team to help support the council to respond to the new risks and challenges facing the organisation. And this is all in the context of providing the Chief Audit Executive annual opinion on the Council's internal control, risk management and governance framework. So the review resulted in a number of audits being deferred, but internal audit work was enhanced in other areas. And through the course of the year, we've had to continue to be flexible to be able to respond to changing circumstances as they've evolved. So the report before you this evening summarises the work that's been undertaken during the year that has led to the annual Chief Audit Executive opinion. It also sets out the key issues that have arisen from our work, and it's supplemented by the quarterly reports that have come through the year to this committee. So in terms of work covered in the year, this has included a focus on the areas that have previously attracted a Category 3 internal audit opinion. These areas have included debtors, housing rents and public health. We've also undertaken a specific piece of work on risk management, and we've increased work in areas, for example, where there's been increased expenditure due to COVID, or where there's been the payment of the government grants, which have had to be paid within quite tight timescales. So from the work that we've undertaken, the Chief Audit Executive's opinion has been that the governance, risk management and internal control framework is substantially complete and generally effective, but there are some areas for improvement required. So hopefully the report coming to you this evening is self-explanatory, and I'm asking that members note the activity of audit and investigation through the 2021 financial year and the progress in achieving the revised internal audit programme of work. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Catherine. Members, any questions on that item? Councillor G.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask about Treasury management, which was one of the audits of the key financial systems. In this committee before, we've discussed how we can work out if the performance of Treasury management, if the reports keep changing each time. So did you come to any conclusions about the way in which things like the Treasury Management Outturn report and the Treasury Management Mid-Year report were presented and the changes that keep being put in every year? Because my view is that it's difficult to work out whether it is effective if the goalposts keep moving.
Thank you for your question, Councillor G. I think I'll need to come back with the detail of that, if that would be appropriate, please.
Thank you. Yes, that's fine. I've got just one other minor question. I see that housing rents is 3. Was that 3 last year? And is it still the same ongoing problem?
No, we had a slightly different scope to reviewing the housing rents. So it did improve to Category 2, But because we've got an expanded scope for this year, because of the issues that we identified, it went to a category 3 opinion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any other questions or points they want to raise on this item? I see nobody indicating. Or Councillor Loyes.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, all. My question relates to page 102, area of risk exposures. Category 1 is seemed to be the high. So how many categories items do we have in this ongoing? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We've actually got 4 categories of audit opinion. Category 1 is the highest category and 4 is the lowest.
Okay, my question was, how many items do we have as a category 1?
From the work that we've undertaken during 2021, we didn't have any items attracting the category 1 opinion. In fact, if you refer to pages 113 and 114.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, we did have one, which was a payroll audit.
Oh.
But pages 113 and 114 actually summarise the audit opinions that have been given based on the work that we've undertaken through 2021.
So, I mean, as far as I understand, is that ongoing then, payroll?
Sorry,
is this still ongoing then?
No, the audit's been completed, and we had category 1, the highest category of audit opinion for that piece of work. So for the majority of the audits that we've undertaken, they've all fallen into the mainly category 2. We had 1 in category 1, and then we had 1 in category 3. We report to this committee during the course of the year on a quarterly basis, and there were 2 audits that have previously been reported as category 3 that have actually improved now to category 2. So those are in the areas of debtors and the public health audit.
Right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Councillor Ross, then Councillor G in a minute. I saw in the corner of my eye, Andrew, did you have your virtual hand raised on Teams? Did you have a point you wanted to make?
I did. I was just going to pick up the point that Councillor G made about the audit of rents, and just to show the read across from your items on your agenda tonight. So going back to the annual governance statement, the improvement actions around rents are one of those 8 actions that you looked at earlier. So what we're doing here in the annual governance statement is sort of picking up the work of internal audit and anything that's coming out of the risk management work as well. But I just thought it was helpful perhaps to highlight that read across.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 108, we've got the COVID Business Grant Fund pre and post assurance work. And there's what appears to be a very good news story here when one hears in the media the amount of money that appears to be misplaced nationally. Also, given the fact that EY are going to be looking at this matter, but is there cause for optimism that we had some very good internal procedures?
I think because we were able to work very closely with the revenues team, we were able to ensure that there were controls in place before the payments were actually being made. So we were there involved right at the beginning of the process, and I think that's helped to try to prevent fraud getting into the system in the first place.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor G.
Yeah, just one question for clarification. The table on page 106, 4.2, should that have a 1 in it for the payroll, and then substantially complete and generally effective? Should that be 7? Do they agree with the tables on page 113 and 114? Maybe one's been updated and one hasn't.
Yes, I think one of them has been updated and one hasn't, but thank you for that. Thank you for pointing it out.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other members, any questions, any points? I see no one indicating. And looking at the recommendation, I don't think we've got anything to vote on this item. So I think it's just to thank Catherine for the report. Thank you. And now, committee, I think we're on to the final agenda item, which is number 11, which is to consider the forward programme for the remainder of the municipal year, which is page 115. Are there any points members want to make on the forward programme? Is there anything look strange? Councillor Shepherd-Bay.
I mean, I know it's been mentioned in this meeting, but obviously with training for the audit committee members and for other members of this council on what we do and why we're here. Does that, it's been mentioned, I just want to see it on the list, that's all.
Okay, yeah, it's probably maybe an item for debate, whether it's an item actually of this committee for us to consider at a meeting, or whether it's something we action outside of the committee, because as you say,
I think it's something for this committee, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something this committee wants to achieve. But maybe if I can go away and work with Andrew on exactly what that looks like following our discussion.
Are you going to bring it at the next meeting? What you're going to do?
Yeah, it's probably worth either us bringing an update to you all at the next meeting, or whether or perhaps even before then on email, depending on how quickly things progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else got points to make? Councillor G.
Yeah, just two things. Because the Climate Emergency Action Plan audit is so important, I'm wondering whether it should be listed as one of these, or whether it's would it be under internal audit and investigation quarter two plan or something like that. And the other thing is, will we be seeing the final version of the 2019-20 accounts?
Okay, so I'll probably take those one at a time. So I think on the climate emergency, I think it's probably scanning through to see when it's the internal auditors due to report back to us on the results of their work, and so it's probably comes under that item, them reporting back on the internal audit they've conducted of the climate emergency action plan. And on point 2, on the current state of the statements of accounts, I think Bob is still on the line. He's probably best placed to give an update on the position of the accounts.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, we're virtually complete on those accounts. There is that last piece of work around the pension fund, and then there's got to be just the final assurance that we obtain from EY. Working very closely with them, we believe that we should have something, I hope, by the third week in June, which is this month, which will be then obviously signed under the delegation that was agreed at the last committee, and we will then circulate to all committee members and publish our accounts online on the website, as is the requirement under statute.
Councillor G, follow up on that?
Yeah, I'd like to make a request that if that doesn't come to fruition, then we should have an update on the accounts in the meeting in July. I think we should have the latest version, showing all the changes which we've had before. If that doesn't come to fruition, I mean, I'm hoping it does, in the end of June. But if it doesn't, I think this committee needs to see the accounts and see where we've got to. Thank you.
Yeah, I think certainly, because the process has looked a little different over the last couple of years in terms of the timing and the progression of the auditing of the accounts and final sign off and so on. It's probably worth us having a regular check-in at these meetings to see exactly what the status of the accounts is. So, so I think we'll plan for that next time round. Any other items anybody wants to raise? Doesn't look like it. So I think that brings the meeting to an end. Thank you very much, everybody.